Hello there. This is December 9th, 2022. I've got a question from Brad in Castle Rock, and this is about King David that in 1 Kings, not 2 Kings, 1 Kings chapter 15, there is a mention of David being obedient to God, and he's questioning this. He's wondering about this. This is what Brad said. I was wondering if you could speak to 1 Kings chapter 15, 4 through 5, specifically verse 5, where it says, David had done what was pleasing in the Lord's sight and had obeyed the Lord's commands throughout his life, with the exception of the Bathsheba incident. I believe this is not to be understood as David being sinless, but I was wondering how it can be said that he obeyed the Lord's commands when the law is supposed to condemn under sin, pointing out our sinful condition. If the law ministers death, how can it be said that David followed his commands throughout his life? Would you help me to understand these? Okay, well, you could say that he did follow the commandments of God, except for those, and there might be some other ones too. Probably are some other ones that could be pointed out. They just weren't documented. And so in every case, a person could be described as someone who followed the commandments of God, except for these, whatever those are. Anyone can be described that way because it is probable, all right? I mean, the probability is quite high that there is at least one of the commandments of God that a person could obey if they were to really, try, if they were to really live their lives committed to it. And I would suggest that whatever that commandment is, it's probably close to the one through which they have no temptations to violate anyway. All right? So if you look carefully at the law, you'll find that, the Lord said that there were a lot of things that were considered to be evil. And I'm sure you're going to find something that you would look at and say, well, gosh, I would never even consider the thought of doing anything like that. Well, then there you go. You got one commandment that you have obeyed. And so you could fit into this category and say you were obedient to all the commandments of God except for, a few of these. Okay, and so that's my way of reading through this. I read through it from that point of view, is that whoever is writing this, whoever wrote this, to me, what they wrote is not necessarily going to be any unique to anyone else. And so that's why I don't put a lot of energy or effort into this verse and others that can be considered to be similar, because the conditions that are applied, the conditions, they can be applied to anyone. So looking at chapter 15, 1 Kings chapter 15, I think it's better to just kind of look at it to see, well, what was this person really thinking? What were they really wanting to say? I don't think that they really wanted to say that this was the important point of what they were saying. I don't think that the important point had anything to do with David was obedient to God, except for him committing murder and adultery, both of which we definitely need to execute him for, and nobody executed him for that. So things are definitely off, But, besides murder and adultery, he's a pretty good guy. I don't think that's what he was wanting to emphasize. Okay, there's something else that I think he was wanting to emphasize. And so let's read the passage. I'm going to start in verse 1 in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 1, just in order to get the history behind this. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijah, that guy, became king. It's easier for me to read it in Hebrew than English. Became king over Judah. He reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the granddaughter of Abishalom. And he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him. His heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by setting up his son after him and by establishing Jerusalem. Okay, so the writer is wanting to emphasize the point because he says, nevertheless, all right, regardless of what was going on with this king, you know, the Abijam, that guy, you know, however that would have been Abiyam pronounced. I got to read this in Hebrew. In English, I do really bad with names. But he says, regardless of this king, regardless of this guy was awful. Okay, but regardless of him, it appears that when his son took power, things were pretty good. You know, his son turned out pretty well, even though his father was awful. You know, and that's okay. That happens. So he says that, and then he gives a reason. In verse 5, the writer gives a reason. Now, it does not say that the Lord said this, and that's important to recognize, okay? Because if we were to be consistent, you know, and the Lord would do this because of David, well, what about his dad? You know, I mean, maybe he should have done something good for him too, right? So he's adding this, but this is not thus saith the Lord, all right? This is not the Lord saying this. This is whoever is writing this, and sometimes it is important to pay attention to this difference. All right, to include the fact that sometimes things are recorded that are the perception of the person who is writing it, but it definitely isn't true. There are some occasions when that happens also. Okay, but here in verse 5, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Except in that, except for the murder and the adultery. You know, besides that, all right. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. You know, so you've got a description here that the person says that this son, okay, whatever his name was, I could go back here and read this. His mother's, he reigned 3 years, so the dad reigned for 3 years. Okay, it doesn't say what his son's name is here. I have to go look. All right, but whoever, you know, whoever this was, the writer says that he established Jerusalem, and the writer has given this reason. Okay, now the Lord has not said that this is the reason. So it could be true, you know, it could. I'm not going to say that it's not. I would not say that it is not true. I'm not going to say that either. I'm not going to say that it is true, and I'm definitely not going to say that it's not true. But what I can say is that this is what the writer believed. That is what I can say. And that if God decided to do this for the sake of David, because David was obedient to him, except for, of course, the murder and adultery, then so be it. All right. But that's how I would read this. That's how I would navigate this. All right. Again, to answer this question, this could be said of anybody because anybody can have at least one sin that they didn't commit. In this case, the writer is identifying two sins that David committed. All right? But this does not imply that David was obedient to the law of God, to the satisfaction of God, such that David could have some kind of a claim of righteousness before God. That we could not have. All right? So that's the best way that I can think of to answer this. I hope that it's helpful. And if you got any other questions for me, send them to me directly by email at aaron@aaronbudgeon.net. Thanks.